Hello everyone, welcome back to Out of Spec Guide. I'm Max. You join me for basically near the end of 2023. Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrated. This should be coming out the day after Christmas. And there's just a few days left in the year, which also means a few days left in the current iteration for the United States of the federal EV tax credit regime. Things are changing with the tax credit. I have covered it on this channel before. By the way, thank you everyone this year who has joined the channel, subscribed. This is like one of the newest out of spec channels, and it's been so great to see the growth we've had this year. We're going to continue to cover the EV market for beginners and buying your first EV advice, all of that to come next year because the tax credit and of course many more things will be changing. In this video, I don't want to get too sappy and sentimental though. I want to focus on the latest and greatest we know. Again, I've done videos talking about what's changing in 2024 with the tax credit. I will put those in the info card because a lot of that is still relevant, but we know some vehicle specific data, basically a few vehicles that because of stricter requirements in the Inflation Reduction Act relating to Chinese sourcing of key battery components and minerals will no longer be getting the tax credit, as well as a few wrinkles like the point of sale being a thing for the tax credit, meaning it's more like money up front as opposed to a non-refundable tax credit the way it works right now, where you realize it a few months later when you do your taxes. So let me jump into it. I've got a few research notes pulled up here that we'll go through to talk about maybe, should you go and run out and buy a Tesla Model 3, let's say, in these next few days? Long story short, I don't think you should, but let me tell you what's changing and get you prepped for 2024 as we begin a new year in the EV market. By the way, such an interesting year, so many twists and turns. I know a lot of people are skeptical about electric cars and the market at the moment. We're going to be covering all of that right now with rising inventory at dealers, of course, changes in the tax credit that we're mainly mentioning in this video, but so much more to cover that I really want to get into. So of course, you can stay tuned to Out of Spec Guide for all of that coverage. Thank you again to everyone for continuing to watch this channel. But I want to talk about some of the nitty gritty here. So Inside EVs has done some great coverage, as of other outlets, even mainstream ones like the New York Times, about the fact that fewer electric cars are getting the tax credit starting next year. The big story is the Tesla Model 3, which I made a video about. At the time, we thought the Model 3 rear-wheel drive and long range would be losing half of the tax credit because there are two components to it. There's the battery component and there's the vehicle assembly component that, are each half $3,750. You combine those for the full $7,500 amount. Well, it seems like, according to Tesla and their latest data, that both the rear-wheel drive and the long range will lose the entirety of the tax credit next year. It's unfortunate because, of course, right, it will be kicking into a point of sale credit, meaning that even people who didn't have the tax liability would be able to realize basically like a juicy down payment on their car, could be cash off the hood, could be lower monthly payments ameliorated over their payment plan if they're financing, could have been really nice. Well, it will no longer be the case. However, the leasing loophole and provision still applies for Tesla and everyone else. So if you're leasing, there's way looser requirements in terms of all of this, foreign mineral sourcing. So Tesla and many other EVs will all be eligible, and they'll basically be taking the tax credit and passing it on to you if leasing is something you want to do. I don't always recommend it for vehicle ownership, but something to consider. So Model 3, my thoughts here are, there is a refresh that we've seen already in Europe and China that's come out. It's a great one. It's a much quieter new front end and things like that. So if you've been waiting to buy a Tesla Model 3, I don't necessarily think you need to buy one now. I understand that tax credit is a big deal for many folks in terms of affordability. There are other state incentives. There are other utility incentives. I'm also not going to discount that Tesla does discounts frequently. This year, the price of a Tesla Model 3 and Model Y effectively went way down without any kind of federal incentive, just due to Tesla changing their prices. I expect to see more of that next year, whether it's because of rising inventory or just Tesla coming out with a new model and wanting to get rid of the existing Model 3 inventory. I think stay tuned, especially on those inventory pre-configured Model 3s on Tesla's site. There might be some good deals about that. Just my speculation. The Tesla Model Y also is not losing anything with its tax credit. Nothing about that seems to be changing for 2024, and effectively should be point of sale. So we'll cover that, of course, early next year as that happens, but that's exciting. In addition to Tesla, though, because we don't just cover Tesla on this channel, GM is losing it for its two most relevant EVs it sells at the moment. A little bit unfortunate, but it is losing it for the Lyriq and the Blazer EV, which have been to be honest, submitted with many of their own problems. If you've been following the EV world with quality control and just generally shipping them, I haven't seen many of them on the road. But for those of you who are buying them, well, at least for the first part of 2024, there will not be a tax credit. I think GM has indicated they're interested in matching it. Depends on the dealer, but they might try to match a tax credit, basically pocket it or take the money out of their own wallet instead of the government's. And they're going to, of course, try to work out the sourcing of certain components. I believe it has to do with separators and the electrolyte components in the battery. Very nitty gritty, but they're going to try to do their best sometime early next year to get it back. GM and EV promises, you always have to just be skeptical. And I'm not blaming GM in particular here. Everyone is been caught off guard, including Tesla and everyone else, by all of the wrinkles and exact details of this stricter tax credit with what vehicles qualify. You will also be losing the tax credit for the Mustang Mach-E, which currently gets half of it. It now will get none of it. A lot of plug-in hybrids will still be getting it, not the Lincoln Aviator Grand Touring from Ford. The F-150 Lightning, as a full electric vehicle, will still be getting it. So will the Pacifica minivan and the Grand Cherokee and Wrangler 4xe from Jeep. Inside EV is great coverage of this, but I also always recommend people look at fueleconomy.gov, which does list basically eligibility. At the moment, they don't have eligibility for 2024, so you can just see which vehicles get it right now. So you basically, I'll link this in the description. You go to their website, you choose your date range for when you will be purchasing the vehicle. Of course, for the current period right now, as of me recording, for a few more days in 2023, here's everything that qualifies. You can filter whether you want plug-in hybrids or just pure electric cars. But if I put in the new year, well, it seems like the Department of Energy does not know yet. No vehicles match the provided criteria because, of course, we're just going off what the automakers think right now. We've heard several different last-minute updates and changes. But yeah, basically fewer vehicles are going to be getting the tax credit in 2024. Even the New York Times has covered this. This is a big deal. For those of you for whom the tax credit, you apply for it and you are maybe hoping to take advantage of point of sale for, let's say, a cheap Model 3 or the Mustang Mach-E. Bit of a less of a deal there because previously, right, it only got half the tax credit this year, but still, not nothing. However, in positive news, more than 7,000 dealers are registered for point of sale, according to the National Auto Dealers Association, courtesy of, a notice they sent to Automotive News. And that's great. It seems like dealers are really going onto this program basically being the IRS front-loading them the money very quickly, assuming the dealer does the basic due diligence to make sure you are theoretically eligible for the tax credit, meaning you don't go over the income caps, then yeah, the dealer is just going to give you the money because the IRS will reimburse them pretty quickly. So it's a win-win program for them. It should make the tax credit a lot more transparent and nice for the now fewer vehicles it applies to, which is unfortunate. But, like anything with policy and government, it is complicated. And I also, again, want to remind everyone that it is not just the new federal EV tax credit that matters here, but there's like a used one. So if you're not shopping in the budget range of a Model 3 long range or, Mustang Mach-E, if you're looking at an older EV, maybe not your primary one, but one under $25,000, like a Nissan Leaf or something older and used, you can get a used EV tax credit. My girlfriend actually took advantage of that this year when she bought her used Chevy Bolt under $20,000. So long as the vehicle is under $25,000 in the US and you meet slightly stricter income requirements, you can get up to $4,000 as a non-refundable tax credit, which is nice. Again, all from the federal government. There are state credits like Colorado, for instance, my home state has a tax credit that's pretty sweet. It is like, it's $5,000. Up to $80,000 MSRP vehicle, regardless of whether it's a sedan or an SUV. There's no requirements on where the battery has to be sourced or where the vehicle has to be made. And that's really nice. So I'm always encouraging people not just to look at their state credits, but also your utilities as well. A link, the Department of Energy has a site that kind of tries to aggregate incentives. It's not the most user-friendly thing in the world, but it might at least give you a start to look at like, oh, here's my local utility company or my local energy, provider providing this incentive, whether it's a free home charger sometimes or a couple $1,000s as a rebate, in addition to maybe being able to take advantage of this federal credit or state credits, which again are more lenient and tend to apply to more EVs. Lastly, again, just to hammer home this point, you don't need to consider an EV with a tax credit, whether it's at the end of this year or early next year with fewer EVs. I have heard stories recently of people interested in a Nissan Ariya, let's say, right? An EV that I don't think is like class leading necessarily, but that we have seen because of inventory piling up at dealers and there being, slightly lower demand for electric cars, whether it be higher interest rates and prices, whatever it may be, just slightly lower demand. Well, they're going for several $1,000s under MSRP. So regardless of a federal tax incentive or whatever rebates, you may just have more bargaining leverage and maneuverability with a lot of electric cars. You've also seen, right, you may have read headlines if you follow EV world of Ford having production of the F-150 Lightning because of accumulating inventory. I feel for dealers, I guess. They've had a checkered history with electric cars, but them piling up inventory, it might actually be a good thing for consumers because that means you have more leverage. They're going to be more desperate to get some of these EVs sold. And I have heard of people stacking utility state incentives in addition to just, a good offer from the dealer to get a really good deal on financing or buying an EV like a Nissan Ariya that, again, doesn't get the federal tax credit, never really has, and yet can still be a good offer. So always consider that in the EV market. I want to highlight more of these specific situations early next year. In terms of what EVs people are buying, thinking outside the box, in terms of just getting a good deal. Because it matters a lot. Again, I mentioned the lease loophole earlier here. If you're leasing, not much is changing next year. You still will be able to have the automaker pass on that credit to you, provided the vehicle is under an MSRP. Tends to basically apply to a lot of vehicles like Hyundai Ioniq 5 that doesn't get the tax credit normally. Vanishingly fewer and fewer vehicles getting that full tax credit the way it should be. But hopefully more will come into compliance if not at some point next year, then maybe sometime in years to come. Keep in mind, tax credits aren't forever. I think the current iteration of the Inflation Reduction Act has the federal one phasing out in 2032. Of course, that could be extended as well as the other renewable provisions there. But as of now, this is temporary measures. This is the government trying to stimulate EV adoption. I think in the long term and generally, we should rely more on market forces as consumers to be kind of our basis of buying an EV and where the value is, because governments are going to change. There may be different policies, different people elected into office, different priorities. However, the market forces continue on, and yes, they can be unpredictable in themselves, but they are, I think, a stronger thing to consider in general for EV purchases than whether or not this EV ticks a specific box to get a couple $1,000 rebate. I would not base a really important buying decision for a car, right? Maybe the second most expensive thing you buy purely on its eligibility for an incentive. Because again, it's so small. It's like Tesla, Volkswagen ID4, Mach-E, a few plug-in hybrids, Rivians, some of the cheapest ones. That's kind of it, in the US for the tax credit. I know the situation is different in other countries. However, we're also seeing in other countries like Germany, tax credits being phased out. And this is just where we are in EV adoption. As electric cars become more mainstream, we cannot rely on these incentives as consumers. It's just not going to be here forever. So take advantage now if you can. If you're going to get an EV now in the last few days, let me know in the comments. I mean, if you're going to rush out and get a Model 3 while it's still eligible, great, congrats to you. But hopefully this has just been a good reality check, some advice on that. I will have much more specifics to cover while I'm home here. I also want to talk about the situation my mom has with getting her first electric car, because that's kind of exciting, as well as some other stories about charging and other kinds of things. All the kinds of content you can expect to see on this channel, of course, accessible for you, no matter how quickly or how new you've been absorbed into the world of electric cars. I'm going to help break it down for you. We give real honest advice as owners of EVs, EV enthusiasts, but not necessarily evangelists. We are just real people here who have electric cars that out of spec, who enjoy them and tell you all about them. So thank you so much for watching. Again, Out of Spec Guide this year. Thanks for watching this episode. Do subscribe to the channel to see more of those videos I mentioned come up in the future. And if you're curious about more of the intricacies of the tax credit, see some of the work I have already done up in that info card. Thanks again for watching. And finally, I will bid you farewell. See ya in the next video, or I guess in the new year. Bye.